Another week, another teal independent announced for the Victorian state election, while over in Canada, their Conservative Party is looking for a new leader. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. This is SpinCheck. Good evening and welcome on this Thursday evening. A lot to get through tonight. We will begin here in Victoria with the state election coming up. We've had another teal independent announced in the seat of Mornington, where Liberal David Morris is retiring. Dr. Kate Lardner, who co-founded the Voices for Mornington Peninsula group, is running in the seat. She's using the colour teal. She'll be running with advice and support from the group Climate 200. Earlier we spoke to her right here on SpinCheck. Great to have you here. So look, it's been reported you're a former Greens member before obviously running as an independent now. Whenabouts did you leave the party?
Or I was so briefly a Greens member and really was on the mailing list as the main. I think I went to 2 Zoom meetings maybe in 2019. So about then. Yep.
And why did you end up leaving in the first place?
I guess I was pretty busy with medical work, and I was also doing a lot of Healthy Futures work on the side, which is an organisation of healthcare workers addressing climate change. So it wasn't at that point that I knew about the independents, and I then learnt about the independent movement and how crucial they can be in the balance of power, and also how they're changing culture within Parliament. And not only that, it brought together the community, building relationships and having fun together and being active in democracy. And I kind of thought that's where I belong.
Yeah, I mean, the Greens can also, hold the balance of power, and we see them do that in a few areas. So you never tried to run as a Greens candidate? You didn't consider running for them? You were just on a mailing list, went to a couple Zooms, is that it?
That's correct. I wasn't interested in being in politics at that point. As I say, it was a journey where I did campaigning work with Healthy Futures, and then I did the Pathways to Politics program at the University of Melbourne, because a lot of the key decision makers we try and sway with Healthy Futures are politicians. And I thought it'll be really interesting to understand what it's like to be in the shoes of a politician and understand Parliament a bit more. But in doing that, I learned about the independent. So that's when I decided maybe politics is something I'd actually be interested in doing. And that's when I helped set up Voices for Mornington Peninsula, trying to build that community engagement, because that's what I really believed in.
And we'll touch on that group in just a moment. I'm just interested though, why did you join the Greens in the first place?
Yeah, I think lots of doctors, and I'm sure lots of people are members of political parties, because politics infiltrates every part of our life. So I think people want to have a say on those things, and it's just like anything you do. If you're maybe if you're part of a school, you might be on school council. If you're part of a sports team, you might be on, you might take on a team role. So given that politics was affecting my life, I wanted to just understand it a bit. But yeah, at that point, I had no intention of getting into politics myself, and I wasn't very active in that space.
Gotcha. Now, the Greens and independents, some independents do have, some similarities, pushing for similar issues. Climate change obviously being a huge one, but also integrity issues. And I think that goes to both the federal election, where we just saw a lot of independents elected, and also the Victorian election, from what we've heard from the Greens so far and what we've also heard from independents. In terms of policy, do you have any policy differences from the Greens? Like, why would someone in Mornington vote for you over the Greens?
I'm not really sure what the Greens' policies are entirely. I know what my policies are, and that's based on the experiences I've had, but also being born and bred in this community. I know what's people have said is important down here. And through Voices of Mornington Peninsula, obviously I had a lot of conversations and people brought up what was important to them. So that's what I can go on, basically. The Greens, you'll have to talk to the Greens person about what they're standing for. In terms of my policies, health, climate, and integrity is what I'm standing for. Obviously, being a doctor and having gone through the Code Brown situation during the pandemic and seeing critical shortages of doctors and nurses is something that I've lived through, but also everyone that's been a patient has lived through that. And I think we basically need a better system. I think party politics lends to short-term thinking, and that's, because it's about the next election cycle. And I think that's problematic. And I just really like the model of the independents engaging with their communities, building that, building those relationships, bringing back active democracy into our society, because I think people have been just so disillusioned and disconnected from politics.
So you mentioned health and climate as some of those issues there, some of your policies. What are specifically the policies, though? Because health and climate, they're just issues. What actually are you campaigning on? What are the policies there?
Well, I think it's really important to reduce GP waiting times. So people wait several days to get in to see their general practitioner, and then it means that people end up going to the emergency department because they aren't able to see a doctor. That clogs up the emergency department, and it clogs up the hospital system. So also reform of the mental health care system. I think it's not working for anyone. It's severely underfunded, and it just needs a complete reform. Also, supporting Labor's urgent care facilities, because that does take pressure off emergency departments and GP clinics, and supporting Green's Denticare, because I think children and anyone really should have access to basic dentition or dental support. I think it's a core part of people's health. So that's health policies, and also for nurses, I think a pay rise is important because they work incredibly hard. They've been working in the most just stretched conditions, and I think that's warranted at this point, particularly with inflation. In terms of climate, I think we need to try and reach for 100% renewable stationary energy by 2030, and as Victoria, and I think that can help us as a country reach our Paris targets. I would like to see a pause on the EV tax that's been made in Victoria until there's a 50% purchase of EV rate. And I'd also like to see, particularly down here on the peninsula, more EV charging stations. We only have two, one in Sorrento, one in Mornington, and that's, not viable for people to be travelling those distances for some people to charge their car. Also, protecting old growth forests from logging.
Now, The Age is reporting that you're receiving campaign advice and support from Simon Holmes, the Court's Climate 200 group. What kind of advice and support specifically?
So it's just really advice on campaigning. It can be varied, but it's at this point not financial. But I'm taking advice really from anyone who is able to give advice on campaigning or has done this before. So it's not just Climate 200, but I'm speaking to people who have run as candidates before, people who have been a part of voices groups or have been campaign managers. It's a whole range of advice, from media training, putting people in touch about website, that kind of thing. So more logistical things.
You said it's not financial. Are you looking to get their funding, their financial support?
We'd be open to that discussion. Likewise, with anyone else or other groups who want to see an independent succeed, we'd be happy to have that discussion. And obviously, it would be up to the team and the community as to whether that would be appropriate to receive that funding.
And just quickly, in the event of a hung parliament and you getting elected, would you be open to potentially negotiating with both Labor and the coalition?
Yes, if it's, something that my community wants and it's something that's in line with our values and policies, then I think, we should be open to discussing that with anyone.
Kate Lardner, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
And of course, you've got a full A to Z list of candidates running in the Vic state election on our website right now, SIXNewsAU.com. Meanwhile, happening overseas right now, Canada's Conservative Party is looking for a new leader. Now, we've been talking about the UK Conservatives a lot recently, but Canada's Conservatives haven't had a proper leader since February. They've had an interim one since then. There was the election late last year where they lost. The Liberals are now sitting at just under 160 seats there, while There's plenty of other parties there in Canada's House of Commons, but still, we don't have a new leader. So to find out when we could find one, we spoke earlier to Wyatt Sharp, 13-year-old Canadian journalist from the Wyatt Sharp Show. Wyatt, this is really interesting because the old party leader was out in February. It's August, and we still don't have a new one. When are we going to find the new leader?
Yeah, Leo, Conservatives will gather in Ottawa, the nation's capital, on September the 10th, so right in the beginning of the month of September, to choose their new party leader. And I mean, the process to choose a new party leader has been going on really ever since, as you mentioned, the former Conservative leader was ousted by his own party's caucus. Canada has something called a Reform Act, which gives MPs the power to oust their own party leader if enough MPs vote to oust that party leader. So that is what happened in this case with Erin O'Toole, the former leader. And now, ever since February, the party has been looking for a new leader. And there are many candidates vying to become the next Conservative leader, the main front runner in this race. His name is Pierre Poilievre. And, you know, his name might not sound familiar. He's actually an Ottawa area MP. He's a former cabinet minister. But he's also well known internationally because of his support of the so-called Freedom Convoy that took place in the nation's capital. Of course, he's also faced some backlash on that for his support of that. But he's running against a number of different candidates. There is a former premier, a premier being the head of a province, Jean Charest, who is his primary competitor, as well as a number of MPs running against him, a number of former MPs, MPPs also running against him. So again, really a very wide selection as to who's running for the leadership of the Conservative Party.
We've had our fair share of leadership spills here in Australia. Is something like this, what you've been mentioning, rare in Canada? Are people shocked by it?
No, it's a very rare thing to happen. The Reform Act was kind of introduced for one of those worst case scenario possible situations. But in fairness, the Conservative leader of the time, whose name is Erin O'Toole, he did face a lot of backlash up to this vote, just after the last federal election, which took place in September of 2021. One national councillor for the Conservative Party, the party has a national council, which is essentially responsible for a lot of the logistics, the fundraising, etc. of the party. There was one national councillor who put forward a petition to remove him as party leader, just essentially after the federal election. Sparked a lot of, him as leader. But there was also a lot more just before he was removed as party leader. A senator for the Conservative Party in Canada's Senate also did something similar, starting an effort to oust him as party leader. Her name was Denise Patterson. So when this actually happened, it wasn't necessarily a shock in the sense of Conservatives were frustrated with their leader, Erin O'Toole, but it was a shock in the sense of, well, this was one of the very first times that this Reform Act has been used to remove a party leader. And I mean, it was really interesting, I think, for a lot of not just political observers, but for Canadians to really look and see how this actually worked. Again, it's not used hardly at all in Canadian history. So the fact that, this is the way that a Conservative leader was removed by his own party's caucus is, again, something that is very interesting.
Just going back to the 2021 election, the Liberal government is in a confidence and supply agreement with the New Democrats, to my understanding. Is that widely viewed as a stable arrangement?
The confidence and supply agreement is really something that has been heavily politicized in Canada. There is a big difference between that and a formal coalition. However, Canada's Conservative Party does, call it a coalition, again, despite it not actually being a coalition. There are, of course, a lot of differences on that. More formal coalition would mean that the NDP would have to support the Liberals on a lot more than they currently do. One big thing with the supply and confidence agreement is that the NDP and the Liberals want to work together to create a dental care program to bring in affordable and in some cases free dental care for Canadians. And I mean, when you look at, again, the supply and the confidence agreement that is currently in place, it is something that, if the deal holds out until then, would keep the Liberals in power until 2025. However, the Ndp leader, as you mentioned, the Ndp is one of the minor parties in the House of Commons, but still has a very heavy impact on the way that, politics operates in this country. Their party leader, Jagmeet Singh, said recently that, he is looking at the dental care plan. And he said that if it does not get into effect, and if dental care does not come into effect in some way by the end of this year, then he would be prepared to pull out of that deal. So a lot of politics behind this. Again, the Conservatives really are unhappy with it. But the Liberal government does still seem to be fairly stable on issues of really that have a lot of importance. Again, the NDP does support the Liberals on a lot of that.
Going back to the Conservatives, I imagine the party has its factions like most other parties. Are the right in Canada really united around one party, the Conservatives? Because I know you've also got the People's Party there that some have even called far right.
Yeah, so I'll start out with the last part you mentioned, the People's Party. Maxime Bernier is the leader of that party. He was a former Conservative cabinet minister in the previous Conservative government that preceded the current Liberal government. And Maxime Bernier ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party before running and creating his own party, the People's Party. Now, after losing the Conservative leadership race, he came out. He said that his party, the Conservative Party, was, quote, intellectually and morally corrupt. Those are the words of that party's leader, the People's Party leader, Maxime Bernier. But when you look at the Conservative Party, during any leadership race, and this would apply for the Conservative leadership race that is currently going on, it is hard times in terms of, political unity. And again, that is true for the current Conservative leadership race. You have some people who argue it's time for the Conservative Party to move and be more moderate in order to attract, people from the Liberal Party and people from the left side of the political spectrum into the party. There are some people who say we don't want to attract those types of people to the party. We want to keep this as the very much right-wing political party in Canada. And then there are still those people who want to move the party, even further right to attract, people like, Maxime Bernier supporters from that People's Party that you mentioned. So again, political unity seems to be, a big issue for, really any leadership race that is going on, whether it's in Canada or even in another country. But again, definitely that is, true and relevant for the Canadian Conservative Party as well.
White Sharp, thanks for your time.
Thanks so much.
And that is this very busy edition of SpinCheck for this Thursday. Thanks so much for tuning in again. 24/7 political headlines, federal, state, world, on our website right now, SIXNewsAU.com, as well as dedicated Vic election coverage. Let us know who you'd like to see us interviewed in terms of candidates, in terms of parties. We've got a huge focus on independents and minor parties, so keep us posted. Let us know if you see any candidates, by the way, who aren't on our list, and we'll add them as soon as possible. For now, though, I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Have a great night.